afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Cabinet. Unfortunately, the leader is indisposed this afternoon, so in his absence, I'll be chairing the meeting. First of all, apart from the leader, we are short of, who are we short of? Councillor Jordan, Paul Jordan. We've just arrived. And could I also welcome to her first Cabinet meeting Councillor Jane Pratt. And so welcome, Jane, and I'm sure you'll soon get your feet under the table, and I hope you enjoy the time that you have on Cabinet, and I know that you'll do the job exceptionally well. So welcome to you. If we actually go round the table, first of all, with introductions, first of all, Cabinet members. Jane, do you want to start?
Yeah, Councillor Jane Pratt.
Phil Murphy, Cabinet Member for Resources.
Bob Greenland, Deputy Leader.
Richard John, Cabinet Member for Children, Young People and Modern Life.
Sarah Jones, Cabinet Member for Social Justice and Community Development.
Penny Jones, Cabinet Member for Social Services, Health and Safeguarding.
And opposition members?
Councillor Butcherini, Leader of the main opposition group.
Councillor Jo Watkins, Leader of the Liberal Democrat group.
Okay, main opposition group for the moment, yeah. And we will also be joined at some stage by Councillor Frances Taylor, who is now leader of the independent group, but she is running a bit late, but she will be with us. Also, we've got Chief Executive Paul Matthews, and we've got the Head of Legal and Monitoring Officer, Matt Phillips, with us as well. Other officers are in the room, and so if you're called upon to speak, perhaps you could just identify yourselves at the appropriate time. We've dealt with apologies for absence. Unless there are any declarations of interest at this stage, I just ask that when we come to the points that you declare them at that point in the meeting. We have 4 reports in front of us this afternoon. And the first report is a Section 106 funding, Forensic Science Laboratory Site, Chepstow. So I hand over to Phil Murphy.
Yes, thank you, Deputy Leader. And the recommendation here is that Council agrees to a budget of £77,736 being created in 2019-20 to fund a list of projects, and I'll go to them in a minute. The funding for that is by a corresponding contribution from the Section 106 balances held by this authority from that agreement that was struck in relation to the Forensic Science Laboratory site in Chepstow. Grants have been put forward for 3 basic projects here. It's the upgrading of the Bayfield and Danes play areas of £46,736, Garden City Sensory Garden of £6,000, and £25,000 for the Children Voices Play project. I think I should say a little bit more about that. This is where a survey was done by the children in the area, and they looked at all sorts of things that was wanted. They've had a look at that with regards to the Bayfield and the Danes open spaces. There's also a lot of work that needs to be done within Garden City with regards to the open space there, and it's been felt that providing equipment there and upgrading all the facilities in this general area is going to be well worth doing. So on the basis of that, the recommendation is that £77,000 is split up between those 3 projects. And as I say, there's a lot more here that alludes to them. And Mike Moran's here who can provide any additional information. So I don't know whether Mike wants to add anything to that, Bob.
Mike.
Just one minor addition. The Children's Voices project is a project that was undertaken with some primary school children from Thornwell and Pembroke Primary Schools and Chepstow Comprehensive School. And they led on a community survey about play provision in that particular part of Chepstow, which is the first time we've actually gone down that route of including school children in that sort of process. And the idea is that we'll now go back and feed back to the same group of children and let them have a say on which priorities to spend that money on. And if that is successful, hopefully that might be a bit of a template that we can use in the future to involve children more in decision making. So I think that's probably hopefully a move in the right direction. But that's basically what the Children's Voices project is all about, Peter.
Right, any questions, Cabinet members?
I don't have a question, it's just an observation. That's great, that particular project's really good to see. I mean, we brought forward the Place Efficiency Assessment and Action Plan to the last Cabinet meeting, and it falls totally in line with what we're trying to pursue in terms of engaging a demographic like those young people. And yeah, just really positive to see, and hopefully that'll make a real difference to that group and the other groups that will be recipients of the funding. So, thank you.
Mike, this comes as a from the forensic science site there. Is there an end date when these monies have to be used?
Yes, it's usually within 5 years of receipt of the payment from the developer.
So I'm imagining that's a couple of years ahead. Yeah.
Yes, I think it's probably another 2 years to run on that. Really, yes. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Right, you have the recommendation that we accept the report in front of you. All those in favour? Okay, thanks very much. And we move on to item 2, which is the revenue and capital monitoring outturn. Again, Councillor Murphy.
Yes, thanks, Bob. And the purpose of this report, as you can see, is to provide members with information on the year-end outturn position. You'll recall that reports come at month 2 and month 7, so we've had a fair idea as to how this was progressing along, and of course this goes through all of the select committees for scrutiny anyway. So we're looking at the outturns with regards to the revenue account and details of capital, but particularly capital slippage, and approved use of reserves. The report will, as I say, be considered by select committees. It's been through SLT. It will go to council in various forms. A comment's been made about the clarity of the report. It contains an executive summary, a report from each chief officer, and summaries relating to each select. And if you read through it, explanations are given pretty well always twice and sometimes 3 times before you get to the end of the report. So I don't quite understand why there is a problem, but perhaps we can get some clarity on that, and if necessary look to amend it again. Only it's not that long since, about 2 years, Mark, it was you who did it, since we rejigged the way that the report was given anyway. I think it's about 2 years, isn't it? So,
yeah, what might be, sorry, for the purposes of the camera, Mark Hancroft, Assistant Head of Finance. When it gets down to select level, we actually colour code it so that each select knows the areas related to their specific portfolio. Cabinet tend to get the whole situation, recognising your oversight. So maybe that's the consideration, but it's very difficult to understand why we've chunked it over select portfolios when actually necessarily the directorates and departments don't lend themselves particularly easily to that distinction.
Yeah, okay. Well, as the member who made that comment isn't here, perhaps we can discuss that separately and see if we can get some clarity on that. So the recommendations, there are made quite a few of them, but the members consider a net revenue outturn of a surplus of 49,000, and a bit more on that in a minute, and that members endorse the revenue surplus for the year being used to replenish the capital receipts generation reserve and notes the effective closure of the priority investment reserve. Over the last several years now, we've utilised surpluses when we've been able to make them to top up reserves, because as we all know, our reserves are just about at the lowest point that they could possibly be, given the pressures of funding on us and the requirements of the residents that we have to satisfy. We're also looking at the extent of movements in individuals' budgeted draws on school balances, and the report of recovery plan intentions as a consequence of their approving changes to the fairer funding guidelines since month 2, and I'm sure that Councillor John will want to have something to say about that. We're also recommending that members note that we only managed to deliver 81% so far of the budgeted savings agreed by full council. There is a table further on in the report that gives a split between proposals that are going to be delayed and those that have turned out not to be achievable. As everybody knows, when we set budgets, all of the officers try their best to anticipate savings that they're going to be able to make and how they're going to be able to deliver them. Sometimes that turns out not to be as easily done as, well, nothing's ever easy, but you know what I mean, as perhaps envisaged, and sometimes these things take longer to do. And sometimes other aspects of their considerations throw them off course and they're not able to do it. So whereas every effort is made to try and make full delivery, it's not always possible. So yes, only 81% delivery, unfortunately, of those budget setting savings. The table, as I said earlier on, will give the breakdown by directorate of the progress or lack of it in that regard. And we also note the enhanced monitoring of children's services, because as I'll come to in a minute, there are some substantial pressures within children's services and additional learning needs, and there's proposals set out in the report as to how we're going to enhance that monitoring. On the capital side, there's a capital outturn spend of 70.31 million, and there's also anticipated overspends contained within that report. There's also slippage of some 9.9 million, which we're asked to endorse. Again, quite often projects are delayed through external forces and we're not able to deliver quite as we anticipate. If you go to item 3.1, the monitoring analysis, you'll see, I'm only going to pick up a couple of figures here. Children's services, that's that reflection of the pressure, and you can see that that if you go from the anticipated overspend in month 7, it's increased substantially by the outturn, and you know, that is something which we're having to look very, very hard at, and no doubt Penny Jones or Julie Boothroyd will have something to add to that later on. There's also some compensatory savings in community care, and I'm quite sure that again Penny and Julie will be able to give us some explanations as to how they've made them. And really, from a point of view of the overall balancing of the budget, it's very fortunate that we did manage to make substantial savings there, because that's helped out considerably with the pressures on children's services. The other one which stands out is the £737,000 so overspend in respect of resources, or standards I should say, and that's substantially to do with Mountain House, so I'm sure education colleagues will be able to look further at that. Operations did a lot better than we had anticipated in month 7. there's still a long way to go on operations, and there's quite a substantial part of the report that dedicates itself to giving explanations as to how we've arrived at that figure. So the outturn forecast presumes the beneficial effect of £894,000 worth of revenue costs meeting capital definitions. This went to a lot of discussion, particularly with regards to budget setting at last time. It's considered that there are items of expenditure that we've traditionally charged to revenue that were in reality more appropriately charged to capital. This gave us the opportunity to relieve part of the budget pressures and support frontline services. So that additional National Capital Resources grant of 1.3 million enabled us to manage that without having to put pressures on other services. So that was a very, very useful move that we were able to make. Specific pressures exist around additional learning needs, children's services, passenger transport and car parking. Again, there's a section on that, where activity no longer reflects the budget provided given the savings previously volunteered by service colleagues. And there is a link here between ALN and transport, and I know that Richard John wants to expand on that, so I'll leave that to him. With regards to the overall surpluses, we look for comparison there. In 16-17 we made 884,000, 17-18 652,000, and if we hadn't have had that opportunity within that 1.3 million of capital grant to take that alternative managerial move, there would have been a loss for 18-19, but fortunately we came out with a surplus, and that surplus will be utilised, as I said earlier, with regards to funding the opportunities to capitalise on asset sales. I don't know whether Mark or Peter Davis, Deputy Leader, want to comment on any of that, but at that point I'll stop, because there is such a substantial amount of explanation within this report that most people will have got answers to their questions out of that. There is one point that I would just finish on, that if anybody wants any further breakdown with a good deal of explanation with regards to the savings that were able to be made and those who weren't, Appendix 1 gives a traffic light breakdown of all of that, with explanations on a point-by-point basis, which is well worth looking at if you want further explanations of things that weren't achieved. So I'll stop at that.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you for that very full explanation. I notice Councillor Taylor has arrived. Welcome, Councillor Taylor. That's all right. That's fine. Welcome to your first Cabinet meeting as leader of the Independent Group. Just before I bring in officers, I'm aware that there are questions that have been put by Councillor Petruni and Councillor Taylor, and listening to Phil's opening statements, I think actually he's covered a lot of those within what he has had to say. But I will in a moment come over to finance officers to ask you to pick up any questions that you think have not, because I know you're aware of the questions that might not have been covered by Phil. But first of all, I'll bring in Richard, because I know you want to ask a question at this point.
Thank you. I just wanted to pick up on those 2 points that Councillor Murphy made about school deficits firstly, and we continue to work really closely with the schools which do have significant deficits in Monmouthshire. and we're working with them to ensure that those deficits are both reasonable and recoverable. We have seen an improvement in performance this year from predictions at the start of the year, but our schools, like schools right across Wales, feel the consequences of financial pressures. We're not alone in Monmouthshire. You know, these pressures are being felt right across the country, but we're working as closely as we can with our schools to develop their recovery plans in such a way that they do not negatively impact on standards of teaching and learning. On the point about additional learning needs, we continue to strive to find suitable placements for children within county. If we can meet a child's needs within Monmouthshire, closer to their family, closer to their community, that's the right thing to do. So I think that's a really important point about out of county placements and the associated transport costs. But we certainly have a growing population of children with additional learning needs and needs which are increasingly complex. But we have a number of measures in place to meet that demand. And I won't go through all of them, but our team have regular face-to-face meetings with schools, with the head teacher, with the Elenco, and to strive to ensure that people's needs are met. There's clearly a focus on early intervention to try to prevent the need for a child to move into a specialist setting. And we're also developing the capacity of our special needs resource bases across the county to provide some specialist outreach, support and advice to mainstream schools. So there are a number of measures that are being pursued, and we'll continue to try to ensure that every child has the opportunity to get on in life.
Thank you. Turning to finance officers, is there anything else you would like to add at this stage that might, in fact, help members, but also to help the Councillor Batrouni and Councillor Taylor who put questions? Anything that hasn't been covered yet?
Through you, Chair, I think it's really to the leaders of the Labour group and independent group to identify, I guess, any questions that they feel haven't been suitably answered. We can either provide a response to those here and now, or provide information subsequent to the meeting.
Okay.
So I'm very happy to be guided.
Mark.
Just one point of pragmatism, really, to remind members that actually the budget monitoring is effectively a management tool. It would be nice to expect the activity to exactly mirror the budget. That's not usual within a local authority context. And actually, the situation presented 3 times a year to members and 4 times a year to SLT allows them to take remedial decisions and actions to derive a balanced bottom line across the piece. So whilst we do have some volatility in terms of pressures, we've also manufactured remedial savings through the year to accommodate a net surplus.
Okay, Councillor Batrouni, is that, have you heard the explanations that you were looking for to the questions you raised?
No.
Is there anything else, I mean, rather than going through all the questions here and now, is there anything that we can answer here at the meeting, or is it better if you actually have a more detailed response written?
I prefer it in the meeting. I don't mind.
If we can, let's do it.
Yeah, sure. Firstly, it's good to see you back in Cabinet.
Thank you.
After your continuing treatment, so I just want to put that on the record. I look
you.
forward to you amending my motions in future council meetings with great relish. Why we changed our borrowing strategy? I've talked about this quite a bit, but we using short-term loans, short-term borrowing for a number of years now. We're looking to put into more fixed rate, longer-term instruments. I'm just wondering why the change of heart.
It's not a change of heart. I mean, annually, both the audit committee and the council agrees a treasury strategy. there was a recognition in that actually we've derived quite a benefit from borrowing short term because we're in the perverse situation that short term rates are cheaper than longer term rates. However, with the money markets, where there is any uncertainty, the market prices accordingly, and we suspect that actually interest rates are at a historic low. So in terms of managing that portfolio and spreading that risk, there's probably a potential for interest rates to rise, but we're always mindful at the moment of any particularly attractive longer term lower rate deals. But actually the practices that we operate are within the policy and strategy that the members have given us flexibility to operate in.
I think it's fair to say to Chair that there isn't anything new about this, and this strategy comes before the audit committee every year. We usually get people from Arlington Close, the Treasury advisors, along to talk us through that, and we've had a policy of internal and short-term borrowing now for a long time. And so with that bit that you've added there, Mark, about the current bit, I think that that explains why we will be as flexible as we possibly can be. But in any Treasury strategy, our Treasury advisors will constantly be telling us what direction we should go in. So if we suddenly swap, it's because of external advice, isn't it?
Thanks. I'll get the council tax benefit one in an email. Estates has saved a lot of money through further staff vacancies. I'm just wondering how that fits with our investment committee and our greater commitment to invest in estates across not only this county but other counties. I'm just wondering how capacity is going to cope with that, considering we're losing staff.
Well, there's a restructuring coming forward any minute, and which will see to pretty well all of that. There are two vacancies within estates. One was the head of estates post and the asset valuer post. Head of estates, that was when he went to RCT, was it? The restructure of the department will deal with a lot of that. We have been unsuccessfully trying to get a valuer. The private market is paying slightly more than we can. It's been difficult to recruit to that post. We may have to take a different view soon, because we are getting to the stage where we really do need somebody in that post. But I can assure you it is in hand, and we are certainly bringing measures forward pretty soon. Whether you want to add to that, Peter, I don't know. I think that pretty well covers it.
Cover everything, Councillor Murphy.
Okay.
Additional learning needs. Just explanation of why we've overspent 695k.
Do you want to do that, Will?
Yeah, of course. Thank you. Will McLean, Chief Officer, Children and Young People. The pressure is simply growing numbers of children who have additional learning needs in school. We've tried to manage that as best we can within county, certainly through the provision of extra support to children. But it is a growing pressure. We're seeing more and more children presenting, especially with the impact of things like ACEs, early life trauma and attachment issues. And that does bring its way into the classroom. The other impact of recent legislation changes is that the new ALN and Tribunal Act means that we're increasingly focused on early years. So we have procured and commissioned additional early year educational psychologists. That does help us in early identification of children with needs, but it also does bring additional costs with it as well. So it is simply a cost pressure in terms of the number of children who are presented with.
That was the Welsh Government legislation.
It was Welsh Government legislation. Yeah. They've worked on the premise that it will be cost neutral. We have yet to see it fully implemented. The code of practice will be available for implementation soon. It's an area where there's huge amounts of work going on between local authorities and Welsh Government to determine what the actual consequence of that legislation will be.
Great. Last two questions, if you please, Deputy Leader. How is our out-of-county placements going? The Cabinet member talked about it briefly, but I read on page 28, it's important to note that the pressure of supporting children within mainstream Monmouthshire schools is a more significant pressure than out-of-county pressure. So are we just adding to our financial burden here?
So if I can again, sorry to lead it. So what we're trying to recognise there is that we don't want to put children into out-of-county placements unless we actually have to, unless the provision is absolutely required. So the greatest element of that pressure comes from funding things like additional School Action Plus resource allocation funds to schools to support those children there. We're trying then, therefore, to stop a flow to out-of-county. There will always be some children who require out-of-county provision, and we're just trying to measure that. It's a very difficult piece for us at the minute, and it's a moving piece as well. And you don't know, for instance, in the period between month 7 and month 12, we had children move into Monmouthshire from England. They bring with them English requirements in terms of continued funding, and we have had children reach critical thresholds very quickly where we've had to place out of county and be directed by the courts and by the NHS to do so.
So, but there's more cost by keeping in mainstream, according to this paper?
No, we've incurred more cost because we're trying to keep more children in mainstream. They would be more costly if they went outstream, so the quantum would increase more significantly if they were placed out of county. Okay.
Adult services drop off in community meals by 80k. I appreciate it's a moving beast, but there's also staffing pressures. I hear 155k. Are we worried about that at all, or it's just a blip? Community meals and adult social pressures.
Yeah. Community meals is an interesting one. Obviously, it's a very highly valued service, providing 365 days a year. We have, over subsequent years, reviewed the service on a number of occasions. A number of authorities have actually taken their community meal services away. We've maintained that service because it provides a wider service than just a hot meal 7 days a week. I think we're coming under some pressure at the moment. We've had to increase the fee over the last few years in terms of part of our mandate around savings. It's something that we need to look at, what has been the impact of the price increase, but also the change in our population, and looking ahead and thinking over 3, 5, 10 years, what might the desirable requirement be for a community meal service. So I think we're at a bit of a sort of point where we need to review again. I have to say that we have reviewed it a number of times at different points. I think we've just reached that point again. Staffing pressures per se, not really an issue in an adult services world, but recognising that we employ a lot of people who have, life experience, like having babies, and when we're delivering 24/7 services in some of our areas, we have to replace that staff resource. So actually, we incur cost, which is part of that pressure. But generally speaking, we're not having issues in terms of recruitment to our workforce.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks very much. I know Councillor Taylor, unfortunately you missed Phil's introduction, and he covered a lot of the questions that you asked in his opening statement. There may be some that we need to mop up, but the first one was about the difficulty to understand the report. Well, this is your first cabinet meeting. I'm sure you get used to the reports. Actually, I think that the changes that Mark Howcroft made to the way this was done 2 or 3 years ago have greatly improved this. So that was your first question. The revenue outturn 49k, that's been answered as well, as has the other one about the 894k of revenue costs. I note there is one here which hasn't been mentioned, and that's about the car parking in Morrison's. And I think it's fair to say that at the very outset of when we were negotiating with Morrison's, we recognised that if you put a car park closer into town, people are going to use that car park, whoever owns it, and as long as it's not over expensive or not any more expensive than the existing council car parks, then you are going to get people using that one in preference to ones further out. So it was anticipated from the very beginning that we would get a drop-off in car parking when Morrison's moved in. But when you put that against the receipt that we received of over £15 million from Morrison's, when you consider that they have now, in fact, they're over-trading their area that they are in, and therefore their original estimate of 150 jobs created has been excelled. When you also consider that, contrary to what had been expected in terms of footfall and vacancy units, we were told that when we took the market out of Abergavenny, it would fall. Our latest figures shows that there's actually been quite a dramatic increase in both footfall and in the reduction in vacancy of retail units in the town. Actually, I think when you put all of those into the mix, we've got a very good investment for a possible reduction in the car parking revenue. But we still own there a substantial asset in those car parks. And if in the long term it shows that those assets are being underused, then perhaps we ought to look for another use for them. So I think that's the issue on Morrison's. Is there anything else that we haven't covered?
So if I may, Chair, sorry, just to say, Bob, you're right, it is my first Cabinet meeting as leader of the opposition group. However, I have read many council papers, health board papers over many years. And I have to say, in reading this one, I didn't find it particularly clear. I didn't found it a little bit opaque in places. And I think I'm fairly used to reading papers, so I just wondered if we could just note that point and perhaps have some discussion. Noted. I'm not sure what we can do about it because actually, as cabinet members, I think we've got our heads around this form of report pretty well. But noted. Okay. Next point. Anything? Just the point on Morrison's. Just to say, sorry, Chair, was. Can we actually confirm roughly what the net gain is then? Because clearly it's a significant deficit at the moment in those car parks. So, what is the balance then? It'd be really helpful to know that. You've outlined some really helpful information.
We're in very early days of the car park at the moment, and I'm not sure that those figures are actually available, or I don't see how you can do it. But nevertheless, officers will have noted your issues on it, and perhaps if they can help you, they will do.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Can I just add to that I think that we need to look at this in a little while, because obviously the civil parking enforcement that has recently been introduced has made an impact in Abergavenny, and no longer are people abusing, the streets through the town. And I think that they're going to be using the car parks a lot more because of the civil parking enforcement. And certainly, I shop in Abergavenny a few times a week, and you can now park if you go there at 5 o'clock in the evening, you can actually park in the high street, which you haven't been able to do for a very long time. So I think that's worth noting as well.
Okay, nice. Okay.
The question around the underspending community care, Chair, I think it'd be really helpful to get an insight on that, on what what lies underneath that, because there isn't anything further in the paper. I don't know.
Is this question 6?
No, Chair, that's question 4.
Question 4. Community care. The underspend. How we managed to make those savings. Julie, do you want to pick up on that?
I'm happy to pick up and give you a bit of an overview, but I'm not happy to meet separately and go into that.
Can I suggest that we actually do that if it's a complicated and long-winded?
I can give a 30-second
30-second answer.
Over the last 5 to 6 years, transformation programme in adult social care, part of our mandated savings has been about practice change, and those cost reductions have been feeding through. Last year was a bit of an anomaly, in that we had some grant income and some other streams of income which skewed the picture, which I'm happy to
Okay. All right. Okay. Thanks very much. Sorry, members, I didn't come to you in total. I asked Richard for his comments. Anybody else got any comments?
Well,
Yes.
I really ought to discuss the children's services or just give a quick overview. Do you want
Okay.
me to come to that now or
Yeah,
later?
you can.
And what about the pressures? I'll ask that at the end. Right, children's services is a very volatile area, as you know. It's experienced significant demands since month 7, resulting in an out-turn overspend of £1.45 million, compared to that previously forecast at 56.1. Legal costs have overspent by 230,000, with 252,000 spent on legal costs after the month 7 forecast, which is a lot. Alternative legal provision has been mapped out with the head of law, who's sitting opposite me, as we move into the new financial year, and hopefully that will help to alleviate the problem somewhat. We are experiencing problems in that the judiciary appears to be, ones that deal with children's services appear to be risk adverse, and whereby we may suggest that some cases stay within the home or with kinship, they are often made and put into the looked after children category. So there are areas which can be cleared up there. The numbers of looked after children themselves have gone up to 178 approximately at this moment, which is quite a rise since month 7, a rise of 24. Now, you know, there are different reasons for this, but I think we all know that, you know, some come with very large family units, you know, you just can't deal with the one. So the numbers have gone up, and 18 of those since month 7. So we are experiencing a lot of problems. The other cost of transport and accommodation sometimes has to be outside the area, and at the cost of 489,000 for 6 placements. It can be very, very expensive. So, Chair, I was asked earlier about pressures and how we intend to try and alleviate them and what we intend to do to bring down. Do you want me to address that now, or just briefly, or shall I wait?
Yes, well, you can do it now briefly.
Yes, okay, briefly. Well, as you all know, Welsh Government recently had a review, and they sent 2 representatives, one from Health and one from Social Services, to assess how Monmouthshire manages their looked after children numbers. This was a part of a review throughout Wales, and I think we were number 19 on the list of authorities that they came to, so I think they were a little shattered by the time they did come here, but I think they were also quite suitably impressed in some areas that we were making the effort. The report will be due out soon, and although it doesn't provide actual guidelines, there will be measures that perhaps we will be encouraged to take. The word target is not being mentioned, thankfully, because that would not lie well with us or with any other local authority. So we will see what comes of that. As I said before, we've got the judiciary, and that's been risk adverse. Hopefully there will be changes, and we'll be able to use more kinship and family placements. I don't know what to tell you next. We, Monmouthshire, are also exploring a range of options, and we've submitted a template on how the service can reduce the numbers. This includes various measures, which I've been told to be brief, so I'll just give an overview now, but I can give a report another time. Of course, alongside the rise in numbers will be the corresponding cost pressures, and this will be felt by other services, and that is partly a reason too why AOM numbers have gone up, and also why transport expenditure has risen. So those a quick overview of measures we are taking. Hopefully they will have some effect. There's also a 4-year financial improvement plan, which is, we have had some improvement from that, but it will need to be monitored carefully. That said, we will always treat children who come to our door. We will never turn anyone back, whatever the numbers. So I will answer questions if you want, or Julie may have something else to say. I don't know.
Any comments by members, officers? No? Okay, thanks for that, Penny. We'll now turn to the recommendations. I don't intend to read all these recommendations out, but obviously members will have will know exactly what they are. 6 different recommendations under paragraph 2, and so we'll take them in bulk. Members, are you in favour? Okay, thank you. And we move on to the next report, which is on the Welsh Church Fund Working Group. This is a regular update. The Welsh Church Fund Committee have met and they have made a decision in the case of 3 applications. They are in front of you: Llanwynedd Baptist Church, Tintern Festivals Association and Llangwm Baptist Chapel. Are you members content with the decisions that will have been made by the committee? All in favour? Yeah. Okay. And we move on to the final report of the day, and that is the LDP issues, visions and objectives report and the accompanying paper that has been drawn up. We've got Rachel Lewis with us this afternoon, as well as Francis Taylor and Francis O'Brien, sorry. Francis O'Brien. I wouldn't ask you again, Francis. So,
happy to speak on behalf.
No. Thank you. And so we've got this paper in front of us. It's part of the process, it's part of the early process as we move towards our deposit LDP. And the first thing we have to do is to consider the issues, visions and the objectives. What are the issues that we're trying to address in our LDP? What is our vision? What is our vision for the future of our land use in the county? And what are the objectives? What are the markers that will set out the path as we move along this process? This paper, which accompanies the report, has been brought together very much from the contents of the Public Service Board Wellbeing Plan and also from our own corporate plan. And so the contents shouldn't be really a very much surprise to anybody. Both of those plans have had great stakeholder consultation before they were adopted. And so what we have done here is to bring forward the draft issues, visions and objectives, which was done some time ago. It has now been through both the Economy and Development Select for consideration and to other stakeholder meetings, mainly I think our 4 regional committee meetings. I think at the point that the report was written, there was still one outstanding for, I think, for a Central Committee. I presume that Central Committee have now had that report, have they?
Yeah, it was one of the area clusters.
Oh, right, okay.
Because of the snow, it was cancelled.
Okay. So what we've done is to incorporate the responses, and you'll find those in the appendices to the report. And where it has felt necessary to further add other additions to the plan as we move forward, that has been done. Now, what happens after this, if we agree it as Cabinet, is that it will be still subject to further amendments if we go along, if it's thought necessary. But it is leading to the big preferred strategy, which we will have to adopt probably into the autumn. However, there's one more big piece of work that needs to be done, and that's on Future Monmouthshire. And I would expect that probably next month we will be getting a report on Future Monmouthshire, which again will help us to decide on our preferred strategy as we move forward. I should also mention that as a result of the recent decision by Council on the matter of climate emergency, we've looked again at the report in front of us, and we've decided that we need to strengthen the report that we've got. And issues 36, 37 and 38 cover those, and those are the issues which we believe need to be rather stronger in the way that they are presented. And I'm going to ask Rachel at this time if, and perhaps I haven't actually got, what page is 30? I think it's on page 97 of your electronic bundle, if I remember. But I'm not on that page yet. So if it is, you will find issues 36, 37 and 38. Those are the ones that we intend to update. And I'll ask Rachel if she will read out the updated versions of those three.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. We've amended issue 38. I think we're going to discuss further issues 36 and 37.
Right, okay.
But 38 has been amended to recognise that we're in a climate change emergency and that we're committed to strive to limit the increase in global temperature to 1.5 degrees by 2030. So we've reworded it slightly to capture the recent motion on the climate emergency. So I think it needs a bit further work to strengthen the paper further.
Okay, so that's fine. I think that what we will be reflecting in that 38 is that we have a climate emergency and that this council has undertaken to strive towards limiting the increase in global temperatures by 1.5%. And as a council, we will also be doing everything that we can to move to a carbon neutral position. 37, I think, it refers to further investment in, if it doesn't refer directly to solar farms, it refers to green energy. And so we will be looking as a council at that as well. So as we move forward with the development of this plan, we will be very much looking at the policy changes made by council recently in that respect. I would also add, because I know the issue of infrastructure is something which comes up time and time again when we are considering land use and new developments. It has to be recognised that infrastructure and having sufficient infrastructure to bear further housing in particular is very important. Now, if we were living in a Middle East oil country, what would happen is the government would put forward zillions of dollars to provide great big infrastructure works, 6-lane highways into the desert, which would be accompanied by broadband and water and all the rest of it. And then the houses would follow years after. We don't have that luxury. We have to accept that if we are to build houses, we are going to have to build it in very much a chicken and egg situation, trying to ensure that when we do build them, that the infrastructure is in place. And as we move forward, it will be an issue which comes more into the fore and will be dealt with. But at this stage, we can't say what infrastructure is needed because we haven't even got a strategy at the moment. But let me assure members that officers will be certainly looking as specific sites come forward at the questions of infrastructure. And it's always been the case, not just with this LDP, but with the previous LDP, that we looked at wider issues, not just the building of the roads to get to there, but things like doctors' surgeries, school capacity, and all of that sort of stuff has to be a part of deciding whether or not a site is suitable for development as we move forward. So that is that is where we're going. The report really is just for members to note the progress that we've made. But at this stage, I'll open it up to members and ask if you have any questions. No. I note Councillor Petruni has put in a question on the weighting of the objectives. I'm assuming that you're referring to 4 objectives that are in the wellbeing plan, the Monmouthshire Wellbeing Plan. I don't think there's any particular objective within those 4 that is given specific weight. I think all 4 are important, and as we move forward with the development of this plan, all 4 will have to be considered as we consider the various issues that come in front of us. It may well be that as we progress, we might find that one of them actually, such as I think it's children and young people, the future needs to be considered, but housing for young people in particular might be a priority as we move forward. But at this stage, at the stage we are of issues, visions and objectives, I don't think we're at that point as we are. Is that an explanation, or do you want to?
Partially, so I got slightly distracted. There's lipstick on my glass. I'm not wearing any today. The corporate business plan, the 4 objectives. I take your point about weighting, but the Future Generations Commission got an absolute scathing rebuke for this by determining the wellbeing goals. All 7 of them had equal weighting. We need to be clear on this going forward on major infrastructure. You talked about infrastructure, not to have it so wishy-washy. We need to be clear about the weighting and what is actually our priorities in terms, when it comes down to it, you know, housing, potential natural built environment compared to affordable houses, compared to strong communities. We're going to have a clearer idea on this. And I just say to you, you know, the Future Generations Commission has come a cropper on this, and I think we should avoid that.
Okay, I note your point, but I would also say that I'm not sure that at this particular point we can further clarify that. I think that it'll come out as we move forward with our discussions and the progress that we make. Okay. Any further points that anybody around the table would like to make? Nope. So are you content that we move forward into the next stage, take this forward? It will be subject for further consideration and amendment, and we'll come back to it when we consider the preferred strategy after we have received the Future Monmouthshire paper. Content, members?
Yeah.
Okay. Right, and that is in fact the last item on the agenda, but I know that Councillor John would like to make a statement. So, Richard.
Thank you. Members will recall that we held a statutory consultation on the future of Mountain House Special School, which closed on the 29th of April, and we had been due to bring a report to this Cabinet meeting today. When that consultation closed at the end of April, we hadn't had consultation responses from a number of key stakeholders. We also had a request from members of this council to make late submissions to that decision-making process. So we haven't been able, it wasn't feasible to bring a report to this meeting today. We recognise that this is a major decision, and we want to be able to make an informed and evidence-based decision. So we will be looking to take a report to the Children and Young People Select Committee on the 9th of July, and then take a paper for decision to a Cabinet meeting in September 2019. We have taken the opportunity to reflect on some of the key themes that have emerged so far from the consultation, and we've recognised that it would not be fair to consider a proposal that could see the school close on the 31st of December 2019. So to that end, any further considerations surrounding the future of Mountain House would consider the school closing on the 31st of August 2020. Because of the obvious considerations of pupil welfare and pupils who would be particularly those in Year 11. So as I say, we will be looking to bring a report for decision as to whether or not we progress to publishing a statutory notice to a cabinet meeting in September.
Thank you for that. That's well-timed additional bit of information, because I know members will be anxious as to where we're going on that. Okay, with that, I think we're at the end of our business for today. So thank you, members and officers, for your attendance.